Hi everybody, welcome back. So today we are going to talk about something else you can do with rhubarb. And if you are like me and your garden has been really producing rhubarb heavily this year, and you've made all the strawberry rhubarb preserves, you've made your strawberry rhubarb pies and the different recipes that you normally use, hopefully this Victoria sauce will give you an idea on something else you can do with your rhubarb. So today our recipe is coming from the Ball Blue Book, which is one of my favorite books that I use when I'm canning. And if you don't have a copy, I will leave a link in the description. I will also put into the description the actual recipe that we're going to follow today, so you don't have to worry about jotting it down and making notes. You can always check the description out to get the recipe if you decide you want to make this for yourself. So our ingredients today are going to include rhubarb. We're going to use 2 quarts of chopped rhubarb. We're going to do 1.5 cups of chopped raisins, 1/2 cup of chopped onion, 3.5 cups of brown sugar, 1/2 cup of vinegar, and a teaspoon each of allspice, cinnamon, ginger, and you can either use the Ball pickling salt or a non-iodized salt, which is what I'm going to be using today. Okay, so we have our rhubarb all washed up. Now what we've done is we've taken the stalks, we took the leaves off, we have our stalks, and they're all washed. Sometimes rhubarb can be a little bit stringy, so if when you're cutting it you have any problems where it gets a little bit stringy, like here we've got some of these strings, you can just pull them off, put them aside, and put those in the compost, which is another important thing to remember. When you're dealing with rhubarb, the rhubarb stalks are edible. The rhubarb leaves are not. Your leaves on your rhubarb are poisonous, both to people and to animals. So you never want to give any of your livestock the rhubarb leaves. And that is horses, goats, pigs, chickens, any of your livestock at all. I happen to know someone who had goats. One of the goats got into their rhubarb, ate the rhubarb leaves, and died. So it's very important that you keep that in mind. You can put the rhubarb leaves in compost. Some people choose not to do that either. I do put them in my compost, but let's get these all cut up. Let's get our 8 cups and get back to making our Victoria sauce. So now that we have our rhubarb all chopped up, we've got our 8 cups of chopped rhubarb, and it's cut into about 1/4 inch pieces. So now that that's done, we're going to move on to our 1.5 cups of chopped raisins. Now keep in mind that the measurements for this, it'll be in the directions in the comments, but the measurements are after they've been chopped, both for the rhubarb and for the raisins. So we make our own raisins, so I'm going to use these. You can buy raisins at the store. So I'm going to get these all chopped up, and when I have 1.5 cups done, I'll be right back. So now that our raisins are all chopped up, we have our 1.5 cups of raisins. And if you're ever short on a measuring cup, you can use a Ball canning jar. Some other jars may do the same, but I know the Ball ones do. They have measurements on the side, so I used this for my 1.5 cups measurement. So next up, we move on to our 1/2 cup of onion. They say that's about half of a medium onion. And remember, if you're ever using an onion for any recipe and it only calls for half, save the other half. If you know you're not going to get to use it, throw the onion skins, any ends on your onions, and the leftover pieces into a bag in the freezer. And you can use that if you're making bone broth or, like I do, a vegetable broth. And we'll do a video about that later. So let's get started on chopping up our onion. Okay, so I'm going to cheat a little bit today. I'm using my vegetable chopper, and this thing is great if you have a lot of onions to do, and you just put your onion in, and it chops it up for you. You get fairly consistent chopping, and I will make sure that I put a link to something similar to the one that I have in the description of the video. Done. So now that I have my 1/2 cup of chopped onion, I am also going to be adding the 3.5 cups of brown sugar, 1/2 cup of vinegar, And here we have a teaspoon of allspice, a teaspoon of cinnamon, a teaspoon of ginger, and a teaspoon of non-iodized salt. Now we have all our ingredients ready and we're set to go ahead and start putting things into our sauce pot. Now we're going to take all those ingredients except the spices and combine them in our pot. So we have our rhubarb, our raisins, our onion, our vinegar, and our brown sugar. So we're going to stir this all up, we're going to get it on the stove and get it to come up to a simmer. So now that we've got this to the consistency that the ball book calls for, this is the point where we normally would be putting the seasonings in and then simmering it for another 5 minutes to have it ready so that we can get it canned. But we like to have it a little bit smoother consistency. Right now it's still a little bit chunky. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this sauce and we're going to put it into our food processor and we're going to puree it so that it is a smoother texture and have it more the consistency that we enjoy. So let me get that done and I'll be back with you in just a minute. Now that we've got it all blended up and to the consistency that we like, we're going to get this back onto the stove, bring it back to a simmer before we add our spices. All right, now that we have this back to a simmer, we're back on track with what's in the book on how to get this sauce made. So now we're going to add in our spices and then we are going to simmer it for another 5 minutes. So now that we've got all the spices in, we let it simmer for another 5 minutes and we're ready to ladle it into our hot jars. So I'm using 1/2 pint jars. The recipe says it makes about 4 pints. So I'm anticipating about 8 1/2 pints. I'm using my regular funnel that I use every time when I can. I've got my ladle to make this a little bit easier than using the spoon. And of course I have my little tongs so that I can not burn my fingers. I've got my paper towel ready to wipe the tops of the jars and I've got my lids. So the most important thing is have everything you need together. I also have my debubbler and my measurer to make sure that I leave my 1/2 inch headspace on each jar. So let's get these jars filled up. So now I'm going to debubble the jars, making sure that we don't leave any air bubbles in the sauce. And I've also verified that each of the jars has the correct 1/2 inch headspace that goes with this particular recipe. So, and all that is important so that you don't end up with jars spewing out the top or not canning properly. And always remember to wipe the top of your jars with a damp cloth. I'm just using a damp paper towel. And that's just to make sure you don't have any debris, anything sticky left on the edges of the jar so that when you put your lids on, you get a nice tight seal. Now while my lids are on, I'm just going to put my rings on just finger tight. You don't want to over tighten them if you're doing water bath canning, which is what I'm going to be doing. we'll get all these on. We'll get them in the canner. So we ended up with 6 jars. I'm gonna put these into my water bath canner. We're gonna process them for 15 minutes. And if you hear a noise in the background, I do apologize. It is pushing 90 outside, and with the hot water bath canner processing in here and the steam, we're well above that for temperature. So it's awfully hot. Let me get these into the canner and I will be back with you as soon as they're done. So our 6 jars are out and cooling, and we're gonna let them sit overnight, and we'll check on them tomorrow, make sure everything's sealed properly. We'll get them labeled, dated, and put away in the pantry. Now, a Victoria sauce is great as like when you're barbecuing, roasting. From what I've been told, it is absolutely amazing for ham. Now, as a vegetarian, I'm gonna have to let you find that one out for yourself, but we use it on our meat substitute products. So remember, if you like this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell if you'd like to be notified when our next videos are coming out. And remember to leave us a comment about how any questions you might have on this video or what else you'd like us to make a video about. Until next time, bye.